In part 1, I tested 4 different workbenches. Now it's time to show you mine. Before I get started with the actual construction, I wanted to talk about design a little bit. The most fundamental thing about a workbench is it holds your work up above the surface. You don't want to be working on your knees. So in its most basic form, you could have a pair of sawhorses and a plywood sheet. That was the first thing that I looked at. But this has problems because it's too flexible, it warps, it's not straight. Even though it's portable, it definitely has limitations. But what if we just take this very simple concept and try to improve on it one step at a time? So the first step that I can think of is if we take 2 2x4s and place them here, and then we put the plywood sheet on top. Now all of a sudden we have some strength to our work surface. However, as we saw in the second workbench, it wasn't quite enough strength. Supported by a middle leg, it was okay, but we still wanted some more. So what about, instead of using 2x4s, what if we went with 4x4s? 4x4 is much stronger, and I think we could all agree this would be adequately strong. But it still has one problem. If I turn this sideways, supporting it at the edges of its width, it's still going to have some sag in the middle. So what if I was to swap out the 4x4s with 4 2x4s and space them out at 1 foot intervals? And by the way, the work surface that I'm representing is 8 feet by 3 feet. You know what? This is an awful lot like floor joists and floorboards. So if I do this now, I've got plenty of support across the entire surface. However, there is one more problem here, and that is the reality of 2x4s. 2x4s are anything but straight. If you've been to a big box store, you know exactly what I mean. It's very difficult to go through the stack of 2x4s and find some that are straight. If you happen to have some high-end equipment like a joiner, you can fix that, but most people don't. What I did was I thought about something that is a lot more simple. It's basically the principle that when we cut a fresh surface of something, it's straight. Cutting it on a table saw or a track saw, or even a circular saw with a straight edge. So right after you've cut it, you know that that's a nice straight edge, and that's one of the principles of any woodworking project, is you start with one straight edge. So by leveraging one straight edge as our straight surface, we have the opportunity to build a dead flat workbench by getting rid of these and replacing them with pieces of plywood that you've just freshly cut. So let's get into that. So this workbench design requires 3 sheets of plywood, 4x8 plywood, and you actually choose between 3/4 or half. I built mine with half, and I found that it was strong enough. So we'll begin by taking 2 of the sheets and getting the long members that are going to support the main top. So I've got this measured out for the equivalent of 5.5 inches. The next part is going to get my top sheet to the exact width. I only need to remove a little bit to get that to happen. So at this point, we have the 4 strips that we need for the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and glue those up. I'm using some CA glue, which you wouldn't do in the real world for your workbench. But for here, it's nice and fast. Now, I don't know if you can see it, but this plywood, just like its real world counterparts, is a little bit warped. But the edges that I just cut are not. I'm going to go ahead and lay this right down here. I'm pressing down. I'm going to put a little accelerator spray on there. All right, and it is glued. So what you can see here is that this is now dead straight across. So I'll now continue by doing the other ones. So for the purpose of this model, I didn't even bother measuring these out. And one of the beautiful things about this design is it doesn't really matter. As long as they're reasonably even, you've got it made. And this surface now is completely flat. Now it may have a twist in it, and that's possible, and that's fine. But we know that where the contact of plywood on plywood occurs, it's going to be straight. All right, I just cut out the bottom pieces. So these pieces here are going to be going across the bottom. And this is the point where you do want to have the workbench as straight as possible. It's not going to be setting it up like a torsion box, but it is going to have a little bit of potential warp if you get this wrong. All right, and here's our completed top. So this unit is light, it's strong, and it's straight. Now let's get back to one of the fundamental ways to hold up a workbench, the sawhorses. And this is incredibly rigid. I wanted to build a good base. And one of the things that I remember from a long time ago, people that built model airplanes, specifically the wings, needed to get them as straight as possible. So one of the things that they would do, they would take a couple of file cabinets and then they would buy a solid core door. And then this became a working surface for them. And it was very straight. The door is straight. And the cabinets are not going to be moving at all. And the only issue with a workbench like this was it was just for sitting down. And they never really seemed to be the right height. But this concept of having 2 cabinets, incredibly rigid. And that's really the basis for the next part of my workbench build. So I'm building 2 carts that are going to be supporting this workbench. All right, here's the top and bottom pieces. All right, here are the sides. Okay, so now we've got all the pieces we need to make 2 carts. We have the tops, the bottoms, the sides, and then one, I'm calling it a bulkhead. So you'll see how these parts come together. So this is going to be the bottom. I'm going to go ahead and glue this bulkhead in place. I want to show you how I do this, and I also want to make sure that I don't make well, I think it wouldn't matter, but I don't want to end up making two left-hand ones. I think in this case that wouldn't happen. But sometimes it's nice to assemble things side by side, so you know exactly what you're dealing with. Just get that piece out to the edge. Put this in for 90 degree. Okay. Looks good. Yeah, I think at this point it would be good to go ahead and put the bulkhead into place. Now, when I did my full-size workbench, I did not do that. And I also ended up with a bit of a sloppy construction because of it. So this way I'm really committing myself to making this right. So I'm just putting it in about a third of the way. Also kind of got the angle off, but that's gonna be fine anyway. I mean, not just for the model, but I mean when you're doing this, there's some parts that are precise and there's other parts that don't really matter quite as much. And mostly it's in the don't matter category, which is what makes this a really practical build. I'm just setting that in here, and we'll hit it with the kicker. Now we've got a square structure, so just going to replicate that on the other side here. And by the way, if you decide to do this workbench in 3/4, you definitely don't need 3/4 for this bulkhead part. If it's come down to that and you're running out of wood or something, you could almost make this out of cardboard and it would get the job done. What you're trying to do is prevent the base from racking in any way. I kind of screwed up a little bit. My bulkhead is just the slightest bit oversized, so I'm just kind of holding it down. If anything, you want the bulkhead to be undersized, because you can always squirt a bunch of glue or put some shims in there to fill in gaps. But yeah, having it too big, definitely not ideal. So now here I've got these two units, and I think you can see for yourself that this is a really strong piece. I mean, the forces that come down, the forces that come sideways, the forces that might make it rack this way, it's not going to happen. Torsionally, it's not so good, but that's actually all part of the design, because we want this to be able to twist a little bit, and the key is that it's not connected to the top of the workbench. It's just resting on it. Well, now it's time for the fun part, the casters. So each cart is going to have 4 casters. What I like to do with something like this is use some scrap as a template. Also, when you set the location of these, don't put it too close to the edge, because if you're using bolts, it's going to be hard to access the back side with the nuts to tighten them. So you might want to set those in a little bit. Now that's interesting. I actually just ran into the bulkhead itself. So don't do that when you're doing yours. Make sure there's enough room. I think these are a little bit larger than the real ones, but I could be wrong. Takes longer to mount the casters than build the workbench. When I said the fun part, maybe I didn't mean it. All right. So I don't know about you, but for me, having everything on rollers in a workshop is just fantastic. So now these can roll around freely. I want you to notice we have some space that you could use to put in shelves, or it's actually large enough to put a vacuum. I've stowed my vacuum in there before. Now we go ahead and put this on. You notice they are set in a couple of inches just to kind of help your feet get around it. And then what I did was I indexed a couple of dowels here. So I just set it here and the dowels go into the holes, and that's actually all that I've needed. I should probably pop a couple of screws in here so you can see that. This workbench came out about the way that I wanted it to come out. I did take some shortcuts, some things I didn't measure, but in general I wanted you to get an idea of how easy it is to build this and convince you to try something other than 2x4s. Let me show you one of the shortcuts that I did. I didn't put any webbing behind or in between these longitudinal members, and you probably want to do that because even if it's just to orient them straight and square, so just cut out some little rectangles. I would say just do one per side, put them at the end. You'll probably be good. You could also do one across the middle if you want to keep these more straight. The plywood does tend to bend a bit, but it doesn't really affect the workbench at all. So I wanted to show you some of the things that make this unique. I mean, other than having this really strong and flat surface, you also have a pretty minimal structure. You can put things inside here. I have found it's really handy, and I didn't design this, but I just found if I've got like a sander or some tools, I can just stuff them into these cavities here. It's really nice. Obviously, this style is not going to have a shelf like this one, but for me, a shelf is just a place where things kind of get disorderly anyway. And besides, having a workbench that's on wheels is really nice. So I hope you've enjoyed this build, and now let's take a look at the advantages of it versus other workbenches. Let's take a look at how my workbench compares with probably the best workbench other than the Ron Polk, which is a little bit different. So this workbench, it came out with definitely a low point here It is about, I'll grab my feeler gauge here. Okay. Very roughly, there is 0.6 millimeters. I can get a 0.6 millimeter feeler gauge under there. This one is really flat. It is flat. It has got actually a high point, but definitely cannot put that feeler gauge. Let me get a thinner feeler gauge here. Here's 1/3 of a millimeter. See if we can get this. Yeah, just at the ends, I can just barely get that. This came out really straight, and if you remember, I began with a sheet of plywood. Even though it's miniature, it had a bit of a warp. So clearly cutting out pieces that are straight and then gluing them together has a big advantage. Let's take a look at deflection. If you remember, my best workbenches deflected about a 1/4 turn of the dial, or a 1/4 millimeter. Let's try this one out. Okay, so this one's a little bit stiffer, I would say. It looks more like about 1/10 of a millimeter. From a stability point of view, I'm not really sure how to measure it. It is on wheels, and that definitely changes the dynamic. I try to move it around. It really doesn't move. And one thing that you'll notice is that I am able to flex it like this. So if I had built this as a torsion box, it would not flex. But I'm arguing not to build a torsion box because none of us have truly flat surfaces. So with this, you're not actually committed to building in a warp into your workbench. You can simply put it where it needs to be, and if it needs to be really flat for yourself, you could put a shim between the top and the supports and get exactly the precision that you need. So I think this is a better thing than committing your workbench to basically one setting of flatness that you hope is the best. With this, you can dial it in. Obviously, this is not going to be as portable as a Ron Polk bench. However, what you should know is that because it's on wheels, it's very portable in the sense of it being portable in your workspace. And then if you do need to move, all you need to do is detach these pieces, and in fact, they become a cart for you to move stuff around. So these carts are quite light because they're really just tubes of wood, especially if you build them out of 1/2 inch instead of 3/4. They're going to be very light on their own. The top itself is probably about the weight of 2 sheets of plywood. And again, if you make it out of 1/2 inch, it's going to be a lot lighter. But the great thing is, if you're moving things around, you got yourself a couple of carts now to work with. Oh my gosh, it's doing it. 125 pounds. Oh. Whoa. It's actually doing 125 pounds. Okay, let's get off. It's been great fun building all of these workbenches in 1/6 scale and testing them out. And I want to tell you, I really do believe in my workbench. I do believe in the power of plywood to make things inexpensive, easy to build, and really flat. And I want to tell you, this whole time, I've been using my old 7-year-old workbench. It's a little worse for wear, but it's fantastic, and it is still absolutely square. And it's been across the country. It's sat in a PODS trailer for 3 months, and it is rock solid. So I hope this encourages you to build your own. So what do you think of the workbench, Luna? Is that nice for you? How'd we do?